I will call to order this meeting of the Easthampton Planning Board for Tuesday, September 19th, 2017. Is there anyone here to speak to something that is not on the agenda tonight? All right, moving right along. Planning Board minutes from August 15th, 2017. Everyone have a chance to look at those?
I motion to approve the minutes from September 5th, 2017.
August 15th first.
Oh, you've got two of them. So
Yeah.
I had to print the other. I did see them. So I motion to approve those as well, August 15th.
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, and then the September 5th minutes, people had a chance to look at those too?
Motion to approve.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Moving right along, no ANRs, right, Jessica? Okay, so new business, request for a special permit amendment for Hampton Care Facility. Someone here would like to speak to that?
I am.
Deja vu.
Nice to see everybody again. I want to have Ian Kelly come up with me. Ian's one of our operations managers. I know that the board may have some questions in terms of process and where everything is at, and Ian's the best to answer those questions as opposed to myself. So what we're seeking from you today is an expansion of hours under the new zoning that's been put in place for medical marijuana operations. And we're seeking an expansion from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. And the purpose of that is that it's going to allow us to have some operational flexibility, specifically with respect to security and delivery of product to and from the facility. In addition to that, we feel that the added hours will make what is a medical product available to customers where they may not have it available yet. So that's why the application is before you, seeking a determination that will be just a change to the special permit rather than an amendment or otherwise.
And what's the current hours under the special permit?
The current are 8 to 8.
8 to 8, okay.
Yes.
And is this for hours for growing or for dispensing or both?
This would be dispensing and transportation of product.
Okay. Can you give us an update sort of on where you are and what's going on with the project generally?
Yeah, I'll allow Ian
Sure.
to talk about that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, thank you so much for being here tonight. We have an opportunity to do our first harvest here as of November 10th. So, right now, with the cultivation phase being in swing and then processing coming on shortly after that, about mid-November, we're hoping to have dispensing online by end of the year. So, hopefully, a big haul there towards the last later portion of the year. It gives us about 4 weeks of total time to finish out the dispensing area, finishing the transportation portion, and then also finalizing the processing of the product itself.
Great. So Jessica, just to clarify the process here, this is to amend, so it's our determination that it's not a substantial material change?
That's right.
Change these hours?
Yep.
Okay.
Basically that it doesn't change any of the conditions of the initial permit and everything's consistent.
So your plan is to be dispensing during these longer hours here?
Yeah, as Steve mentioned, it's part of our flexibility to work around the patient schedule. We understand not everybody's schedule is a 9 to 5, and most of the centers that you'll find that are currently licensed offer similar hours. This approach is really for us to kind of be flexible for the patient, and then obviously for transportation of product to and from the facility.
If I could just jump into, these would mirror more pharmaceutical hours. The current closing time at 8 o'clock, if you think about a parent who might get home from work at 6 or 7, you put the kids to bed, get them fed. By the time you realize you're beginning your day after the kids are in bed, it's already 8 o'clock. So this would allow some flexibility for people to be able to still come to the dispensary.
Well, 11's pretty late, right? I mean, that's...
It's, I think that a lot of pharmacies now are open until 11 o'clock, but yeah, we're seeking the maximum under the zoning ordinance.
Do you know what the hours are for other facilities around here?
I think that in Western Mass, most of them are 8 to 9 o'clock.
Okay. You guys have any questions before we open it up, see if there's comment?
We've covered this, I think, extensively, and personally, I do believe this is not a substantial change to the decision. But can you just describe those deliveries and what you'll be doing in those late hours? 11 o'clock, you said, is late. How big are the trucks?
Yeah, I'll allow Ian to answer those questions for you.
Yeah, so in accordance with state regulations, we're using a vehicle cargo van that's been fitted with cage monitoring system, GPS cameras. By moving the hours kind of outside of that range of peak time, we avoid traffic on the roads, certain complications that can be issued with that piece. These are practices we've taken away from other industries that have been successful. But ultimately, that's a two-man team that's working in kind of a light armored vehicle. by doing this, it's just providing a window of opportunity for us to kind of minimize diversion or potential risk to the team and obviously the community.
Armor trucks.
Yeah, it's a ProMaster 1500 is kind of the model that we're looking at. That's obviously been fitted afterwards.
So this isn't an 18-wheeler rumbling down the street at 11
No, it's
o'clock.
not. No.
How about numbers of deliveries or transports a day or during these hours kind of thing? Is this like going to be 10 trips, you know, after 8 p.m. or are we talking about 1 trip a day or?
That's exactly. We're looking to minimize the amount of effort that we have to do with creating multiple schedules and multiple trips, but kind of doing it outside the hours allows us to kind of maximize that benefit.
So what? So is it like 1 transport a day, or do you have any idea what that's going to be at this point?
On average, we've seen that it's usually once a day, to 3 to 5 times a week, but potentially as additional traffic comes on, as we kind of get in the ramp up period, we might see multiple visits a day, or 5 times a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how about sort of? I know this can be hard for you guys, but if you're looking at sort of numbers, the other traffic, if you're open till 11, is customers, patients coming in to the dispensary. Do you have any idea sort of what kind of demand that's going to be, or sort of how many people will be coming in on an hourly basis or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I can take numbers that I've used in previous, markets that we've seen. We've had extended hours in those markets. We've seen increase in traffic during peak times and kind of outside of it. So if you look at a peak time, let's say 5 to 8, that can increase from 8 to 10. And kind of really diverting some of that traffic. But more than anything, it allows for traffic that maybe didn't exist previous days in the week or days of the future week. It allows kind of more of the patient to plan their week around that time. So, but yes, there was definitely an increase in the traffic count by doing an increase in hours.
Do your clients just go and sit and wait to be taken care of, or do they make appointments? Or
No, it is a walk-in. Once they have a recommendation, they would walk in. Currently, that's part of the state mandate. We're not able to take reservations ahead of time.
Just a couple things about the deliveries too, Jesse. So we like to stagger the deliveries for security reasons. So having the extra time allows greater flexibility with staggering those deliveries. Although we probably would anticipate there'd be some additional traffic because of the additional hours, it does allow for a greater spreading out of that time as well. So there's less bottlenecks at say like 8 o'clock. Whereas now, instead of having that great rush between 7:30 and 8, maybe it gets spread out over that extra hour and a half or 2 hours. The other reason for the deliveries is it allows us to probably be a better neighbor for the other businesses at the mills, because then we can do our operations really before they begin business or after they begin business as well.
And if I open up, is there anyone here who's got any comments or questions? Want to come on up?
Just a question.
If you come up and then you can get on the microphone so everyone, the millions of people at home can hear.
Name and address.
Marty Klein, 7 Stone Path Lane. I'm just curious, would you be able to have an open house at the point where you're ready to open for the community at large, or does the law restrict you from only having cardholders come in?
We would be restricted from only having cardholders come in. One of the things that we're really in the process of quite a lot of hiring, which is exciting, and we've got a number of Easthampton residents that we brought on board. One of the things that we do want to do next is to have a job fair. And we've been in some discussions with the city about that. We'll probably have some more details on that within about, say, at the latest by the middle of October, we'll have some more information on that.
Anybody else have any other comments or questions about this?
Why not
Can
have
you-
a YouTube presentation for the public to see what's going on?
Yeah, that's a great idea. So certain things that Google allows us to do is kind of 3D tours as long as the product's not present. And those are things we'll take advantage of. So there's some open presence that you can get to see inside and get to see the makings.
There will be a lot of that community type outreach, and it's as you can imagine, it's quite an undertaking to get this type of project going. So we're kind of getting through our first steps of that, and certainly getting to those next important steps very shortly is what we anticipate.
And did you say earlier there's sort of news and updates on the website? Is that right?
Yes.
There is, yeah, absolutely. HamdenCare.org, you're able to visit there. There's a newsletter that you can sign up. We're providing information on obviously currently where we're at, things in regards to the job postings that we've been talking about, how we're working with the community, things like the Mill Pond Live Series event, that's something that we've been a part of. So a lot of cool and exciting things we're doing there, and then of course on the back end, trying to get the media out there and the information about our site so you kind of get a tour and a feel of where we're at.
There are a number of photographs up there now too, so you can kind of see the progress that's going on at the facility as we speak.
Anybody else? Comments, questions? Can you come up just, thank you.
Good evening, guys. Thanks for your time. Sean Easton, 63 Russell Street, New Bedford. I just wanted to comment that not just the 9 to 5 people, you have to think about fishermen and truck drivers and third shifters that never have time to get there during the day, and you got to have something run late for them too. Because I ran into that a lot as a fisherman. Just general anything. You get home late and you can't be part of the world. You just have to go home because nothing's open. So it's kind of not fair. And that's it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening. My name is Karima Risk, and I live at 38 Everett Street in Easthampton. I was wondering if you guys are going to be seeking out a recreational marijuana license as well and opening up another kind of virtual separation or some other sort of mechanism to allow recreational sales?
Yeah, I think the short answer to your question is we anticipate that we would, but we're waiting to see what's going to happen with the zoning in Easthampton with respect to recreational, so it's a little premature right now.
Have you been following the work we've been doing so far?
Yes, I have.
Anybody else? Comments, questions? Okay, so I guess, our role here is to determine whether this is something that needs to be opened up for an amendment and a public hearing with notice and comment and all that, or whether this is not a substantial or material change to the previous special permit.
I don't believe it is a substantial change, and I believe it's something we've extensively discussed in prior meetings, which are recorded.
Yeah, I tend to agree that it doesn't sound like the traffic for the deliveries is going to be substantial, and I think that probably the increase in customer traffic, it sounds like in the later hours, will probably be offset by less during the busier hours, and it doesn't seem like it's that big of a change. Harry, do you have any thoughts?
I can't see anything wrong with it.
Jim? All right.
A motion to approve the request for a special permit amendment for Hamden Care.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? All right. There you go.
Thank you, guys.
Yep.
Have a good night.
Thank
So
you.
are we doing an amended decision, or?
I'll draft a letter like I did with the site plan, and I'll send it to you. It's the same kind of deal.
Great.
Excellent.
I'll be in touch too, Jeff.
Okay.
Reach out to you this week.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Have a good night. Appreciate it.
All right, next up, old business, continued discussion on proposed zoning for recreational marijuana.
I printed the latest thing we had. Have you made any changes since the last meeting, Jeff? It's the same.
No, I
Yeah, we had, I think mostly what we were doing is we were looking at we were gonna talk about a buffer between facilities. And
Yeah,
people
so-
were looking at on their own at the other cities and towns to see if there were things that jumped out at us at this stage to try to get in front of
So
before.
the last version was dated September 5th, 2017.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I
Harry?
heard.
Okay.
I'd like to go back and have a discussion on that buffer zone for schools.
Yep.
Schools or between?
For schools. I know we already voted the 200-foot deal, I know that, but.
Well, right, but all of our voting is, temporary, it's a work in progress. I think it's
All right.
fair to continue discussions.
Well, I'm just gonna say, liquor is 500 feet,
Is it?
and we certainly don't have a shortage of liquor establishments in Easthampton. So if we made the marijuana deal the same as that would be, I think it'd be fine. I don't think it'd have that big of an impact on it.
I think it probably makes sense to put a pin in that until we have the full board back here to talk about
Yeah,
that. 'Cause
oh,
I
yeah.
think that's,
Just food for thought, that's all.
yeah, I did not know that was the rule under the licensing for alcohol. But I do think we can have further discussion on that if that's important. But how about thoughts on distance between facilities? I know that a lot of cities and towns do that to sort of prevent a sort of district from forming or that kind of thing. I don't know that that's a
Like,
concern or
you
not.
take
but-
Easthampton, like in Cottage, you got about 4 or 5 bars that are within 300 or 400 feet of each other. I mean, they're
Yeah.
somewhere across the street.
Right.
I don't really
So-
understand it either. I mean, won't competition and the license limitations, the number of licenses we're allowed to get from the state, compensate them to additionally add to that? It makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. It's one of the things that probably also depends on whether they cap either by county or town or whatever, the number of licenses, but, yeah, I don't feel strongly about it at this point. It doesn't seem like something that's going to be a concern here in Easthampton. And frankly, depending, as we were looking at the map last time, depending on how the buffers work out, there may only be certain areas of town that really fall into the category anyways, so.
Limiting them by distance would then create a situation where
We may have zoned it out of existence, right? So, I mean, I guess that's certainly something we can set aside if we need to raise it later, but it doesn't seem like at this point it seems to be.
Let it go.
Did anybody, before we open this up for other public comment, did anybody see anything when they were looking through the other ordinances that were noteworthy or things that we haven't talked about or picked up on by the planning department yet or anything?
I saw nothing additional in the direction we were headed. I mean, I think the two big things are the school issue.
Yep.
Creating that spacing, and then the issue of consumption, which I know is something we still have to tackle.
Yeah, and I think some of the things that the planning department had sort of flagged as potential issues to get to, some of them may be further down the road, but I thought the issue of the outdoor growing, I know that the statute restricts that pretty strictly. For the commercial stuff, I think it can't be visible from the outside without binoculars or something like that, but,
Wow.
that and also the issue of the home occupation and the residential kitchens for this sort of stuff, I don't know.
That one's a little sticky.
That's a tougher one. And those seem like the two that are more sort of big picture thoughts about what to do. I don't know if anybody's given any thought to that yet, or.
Well, I mean, the health department, if you're a kitchen, the health department's gonna come in and has,
Right.
you know, Jackie Duda's got regulations already in place that you'll have to follow those standards. You know, I'm not sure zoning wise, what additional standards we put in play.
I mean,
You just make it clear and then there's no argument. So, you know, that's sort of, I mean, so there's two things that could happen, I think, with that. One is that the edibles regs will be so tight that it would be impossible for somebody to do a residential kitchen.
right.
Because there's gonna be so many things that they're gonna need to hit in terms of the potency and the dosing and the packaging, and so that, I mean, so it may be a non-issue anyway, just because of the way that the regs may be drafted and just sort of how the regs are drafted right now in regards to those. They seem like they're gonna be similar to other states.
Right. And Washington, they have the thing about you can't have a dispensary or grow where there's a residence too, which is more for a bigger building, but it would apply in a home kitchen too, I think.
Right,
So.
right. So maybe there'll be a
Maybe a
provision in the
non-issue.
regs that, so it may, again, it may be a
Disallowed.
non-issue. I just found it interesting in the Washington state that almost every single one that I looked at had a provision about no home occupations.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there was a loophole in their state law that didn't address it and ours will be okay. I don't know, but it was, every single
Isn't it-
one had a section about,
Isn't it weird though? I mean, we already have home grows written into our law, so people
Right.
can already grow at home. The difference here is
personal
that then
use.
they can't take it from their home grow for personal use
Right.
and bring it to a kitchen.
I think it
Where's
may
the-
have to do with the dosing. Like, I think if you grow something, I think people may have a better sense of how much they can consume, or like
Yeah.
it hits you faster, so you know whether the product's working or not. With edibles, the challenge is that it takes an hour or two for it to hit, and so people can overdose very easily because they think it's not working, and so they take more, and then they end up in the hospital. And that's a lot of what they've seen with people who are inexperienced with edibles in other states where it's legalized, is that people have a hard time with the edibles. So that's why I think the regs are so strict with the dosing. Like, this 1 square of chocolate is 1 dose. Do you know what I mean? Which may be equivalent to 1 bowl of, I don't know.
I think I
but-
understand that logic. I mean, I question the whole concept of overdose. There is no such thing as overdosing on a non-toxic substance. It doesn't happen. There is no overdosing for cannabis.
People end up in
okay.
the hospital because they take too much edible and they
And it
can't,
scares them.
and it scares them, and they get paranoid and they freak out, and they're having issues, so they end up in the hospital
I
for that.
definitely see what
Okay.
you're saying.
All right.
Okay, yeah, so I mean, I think either way, it probably does make sense to be clear on how home occupations will be treated. Even if we decided to say that that was something that we were okay with, if that's allowed under the regs or whatever, that I do think there's an argument for just making it clear in the bylaw that this either is or is not permissible. And that may also be something that we have to wait until we see the regs on anyway.
I
for
think
something
we
like
would. I
that,
just
but-
think it's good to sort of keep it like flagged as
Yeah.
this may be
Come up
something.
with
we-
some potential language, but then
Right.
see where that
Right.
goes.
Well, it's also something I think that's pretty easy to, the language isn't gonna be the hard part. There may be a discussion about whether or not we want to allow it, but.
Well,
I
the
don't-
other part is like the health agent right now is the one who does the inspections at
Right.
residential kitchens.
Yeah.
I can't imagine she's gonna have the authority to inspect to make sure that somebody is creating product that meets all of these regs. Like, I think my sense is that there's gonna be independent testing laboratories, that's their job, is to sort of test
Right.
to make sure. And I don't know how that'll work, like, will these independent people go into a residential kitchen and, like, it's fuzzy to me on how it might
In
work.
my research, I saw online that they have testing equipment. Affordable, I would think, for someone who's attempting to put together a home kitchen. I'm not saying cheap, but affordable. That gives very accurate results of what the precise, qualities of cannabis might be. So I think that testing is going to quickly become something you don't have to go to a lab for. In fact, I think it's going to become like the swipe card in the phone, where you can do it out just about anywhere. So I think it's a good point. I don't mean to just toss it down, but I think that particular point is something that'll.
Yeah, that may change.
I mean, overall, I'd like to. I think that. I'm concerned, as anyone should be, about a home restaurant, just like I was with Small Oven. I think it was a great idea. I wanted to see that happen before they scaled up. I think that my emotions on this are about the same. I have the same view. I think it's a great idea. Potentially wonderful things could come of it. Who knows what talented chefs can come up with some kind of miracle out there. And I think we should support that as a community. I think it's reasonable to look at the same kinds of things we would look at for a kitchen, fire hazards, traffic who's coming in and out, and apply the same standards we would for a home kitchen.
Right, I mean, the flip side of that is that you don't have the same sort of security requirements for a bakery that you do for a grow facility or dispensary or something like that, right? So it's, my only concern for that would be, how do you ensure that somebody's home is gonna be secure? I mean, look at the Hampton Care Facility, right, where it's, the two-layer doors and swipe cards and all of that stuff, like.
Man traps.
That part, right, the man traps, I mean, that isn't a concern. I mean, my guess is there will be similar requirements even for the recreational stuff, but, that is a different aspect than Small Oven Bakery, right, where it's not a controlled substance. So it may be that even if we want to do that, the requirements would be such that you're putting a man trap on a home residence or something where it's gonna be prohibitively expensive. So I don't know. The idea for having, they have to have 24-hour video, they've got security, they've got everything that locks,
I'm not sure those medical statutes will end up applying to recreational.
Yeah, I don't think we know, but my guess is that they'll largely use that as the guidelines, just because I think those same concerns will be there. There'll be less of a black market for marijuana, right, when you can buy it legally, but it's still a largely cash-based business.
And that's the
It's
issue, is
still
cash.
a federally controlled substance. All of those things I think lead to security being a concern.
I have to agree.
So I don't know, but I think probably that is something that's worth just setting aside or thinking about as we wait and see if, I would not be surprised if it's this.
Would you mind if I asked a question too?
Sure.
You testified, I wouldn't call it testifying, but you spoke before us once when we were going through the process, and I remember asking about how you're handling your banking in the medical marijuana. Would you be willing to just quickly summarize, are you cash-based?
Well, we do have a bank. So
Can you come up, Steve? Sorry to make you get back up here, but.
I gotta make sure I'm on TV for everybody.
Yeah.
So we do have a bank, New Century Bank, and as far as I know, New Century is the only bank in Massachusetts taking deposits from marijuana. And you are correct, it's largely cash-based. So we're anticipating that as part of our deliveries, an armored truck going to New Century Bank, now whether that's a daily thing or how we're going to stagger those, I don't know. But it's absolutely a necessity to do that because it is still largely cash-based.
So you have a bank, and they're accepting, you're putting money into the account, but because it's cash-based, that means they're not giving you like any kind of credit behind it or no checks?
Well, the issue we have is we can't accept credit cards, for example.
Right.
Debit cards, checks, potentially, because that will come from a third-party bank. Those are the issues. We haven't actually accepted any funds yet, so these are some things we have to work out with New Century Bank. We've only spent money up till now. But those are things we'll have to work out with New Century. But we do have an account there. They will accept our deposits. And then beyond that, it'll function like a normal account. They'll allow us to draft checks off of that and anything you would normally do as a business with a checking account.
So another company that came to talk to me, I had some same questions, and he referred to the Cole memo, which I went and did some research on. And it essentially allows a bank, they have people that basically are employed to make sure that every T is crossed and every I is off.
I'm with you.
We
I'm
got
with
it.
you.
Okay. That allows those states that have passed this to sort of meet those federal regs, but they charge a premium for these marijuana accounts to basically fund these finance people. So they're I can't remember the numbers that he told me, but they're big amounts of money that they get charged monthly in order to deposit money into this bank, but they're able to use the banking system.
Not your standard free checking.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up? And then what do you, I know there's a lot going on, and a lot of unanswered questions as opposed to, what the Fed's gonna do, what's gonna happen here in the state. But just in terms of what you're anticipating for banking, do you see any changes coming?
I don't think in the short term. I think in the long term, yes. I think the short term, no. Because we're talking about federal regulation with these banks, so until that moves, probably not short term, but I think in the long term, eventually, yes, we'll get there.
Getting there being able to accept credit cards, debit cards.
Transact business like any normal retail business would.
I think
exactly the
even
same.
a year, 18 months ago, it was looking a little more positive that there might be federal legislation that allowed sort of treatment of this as legal if your state treats it as legal, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
that I think has gone the other direction lately. But
the administration
for banking,
handles it differently.
have you heard of any other banks besides New Century even considering this?
Not in Massachusetts, and part of that may be that we're there with New Century Bank. We've opened that account, we've paid those fees, so we're there for now. It's possible that if there are other options, I think we'd like to. I know we wouldn't have to, don't want to have to make those trips out there. It's expensive to have to do that. It'd be great if we could go to Easthampton Savings Bank and do that, but right now it's not an option.
where is New Century located?
It's in the eastern part of the state, and I forget the name of the town that it's
Okay.
in.
And they're in Massachusetts only, is that right?
I believe they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Steve.
Yeah,
Good
no problem.
information.
Okay, I guess we can open this up. The only thing I wanted to mention, I did find the section on at least growing for personal use, which says that you can't cultivate or process marijuana if the plants are visible from a public place without the use of binoculars, aircraft, or other optical aids, or cultivate or process marijuana plants outside an area that is equipped with a lock or other security device.
I wonder if that
So-
means glasses.
Not the naked eye. Okay, I mean, people have other comments. I'd like to open this up and see if people have any thoughts, or Perry, you okay with that?
Yeah.
Anybody have any comments, questions, thoughts? Come on up, please.
Oh, here he is.
Marty Klein, 7 Stone Path Lane. First of all, I just want to congratulate the board and the city at large for their sane approach to this challenging issue. This is all new territory for everybody, and I think that from the industry standpoint and from the government standpoint, it's kind of being made up as we go along. And from the information that I've been able to see, it looks like the sky's not falling in states where it has been legal, and that for the most part, you ask the person on the street and they haven't noticed any changes since legality happened. So, but it's still, you people really deserve some credit for the way that you've been approaching this, and I want to thank you because, you know, we have decades of, I'll call it fake news for lack of something better to call it, but just the general perception and the paradigm of the harmfulness of this benign substance. We have to overcome that, and it doesn't happen overnight, and so that's that. On schools and the buffer zones, I know at a previous meeting I heard numbers like minimum of 1,000 feet from the nearest school, a quarter of a mile from the nearest school. If the alcohol regs, and I had thought it was 200, but you know better than me, if it's 500, then if someone wants to have a 1,000-foot buffer, then that would say that it is twice as harmful as alcohol, and we know that's not the case, I hope. And so at the very bare minimum, I think that it should be treated the way that we treat alcohol. Unrealistically, ideally, I'd like to see it treated as more benign than alcohol and not with stricter regulations on it as if it were a more dangerous substance. I've learned recently that there's a preparation that they've made, so they're like gel caps, and they're high in CBDs, which is one of the constituents of marijuana that's used primarily for medical purposes. And these gel caps can be taken, and within minutes, if someone is too high, they're like back down to earth in minutes. And so I don't know if, I'm guessing that most of the places that are going to be offering on-site consumption, if we approve that, are going to have those available to customers as well. And I also anticipate there's going to be a heavy dose of education for any of the customers that come in, and if they're going to be consuming on site, then the proprietors are going to want to know, well, what's your level of experience, so that we know how much dose to give you in the marijuana, because I think what you're looking at here with places that are preparing food with marijuana is that it's a sort of a marriage of science and the kitchen. There's rigorous testing to determine, well, just how much is in this one and how much is in that one, because the last thing they want is to have people, as Jeff said, freaking out or, you know, having bad experiences. So they certainly don't want that to happen. So I think you're going to see very, very conscientious proprietors of these businesses who are taking care that their customers have a good experience and not a scary experience. And the last thing I would say, it always comes up about driving after you've consumed marijuana, and you know, probably the most common harmful substance that is in society now are opioids. They're so widespread, we all know it, epidemic at, you know, so many levels. And yet people who are on opioids can walk into a bar and drink until they can barely walk, and then they go in their car and they drive. That scares me a lot. That really scares me. The fact that someone goes into a marijuana shop and consumes marijuana in there, not with alcohol, and then gets in their car and drives, I don't think that's nearly as much of a threat, and I don't think that the evidence bears out that there's been an increase in the legal states of accidents where people have been driving under the influence of marijuana. And I think until the time comes that the police and law enforcement have developed a field sobriety test, there isn't going to be an effective way to determine if someone is too high to drive. And so I just don't want to see this substance more regulated than alcohol, which is a much more harmful substance, and there's really no debate on that. And so thanks again, folks.
Anybody else?
I just noticed that.
Hi again, Karima Risk, 38 Everett Street in Easthampton. There are a couple of points I wanted to touch upon that are kind of a common theme, but also really relevant for tonight's discussion. I think discussions with, I think Jessica had brought out, and we've talked about this unique density of the city, about how Easthampton is a walking city, and with its rich mill history, it just has some challenges that are posed, and I think that should really inform some of the approach taken when considering the buffers, that maybe if you had a typical suburban town, it might be not as much of an issue driving 500 feet, but in some of the vacant lots that we have on Cottage Street and Union Street and other areas that we'd like to see economic development, unfortunately, for one reason or another, we're in a beautiful city, but it's right on top of each other. So that's one thing I'd like to just kind of balance and maybe ask to be mindful. The second point, with regard to edible consumption, and I personally have thought a lot about this as a proprietor who will hopefully have edible consumption on site in the future in Easthampton. I think it is really, really important to take a public health and concern approach, but I also think it's important to keep an eye on civil liberties as well. When we talk about alcohol too, we don't screen out how many shots somebody has. We don't ask them about their previous experience. And frankly, after a person gets stoned, black drunk, and they're stumbling down the hall, we aren't treating them in the same way as we are with these edible cases. And I think to a certain right, this is America, and one of the things is with those civil liberties now we have included in this law is the right to have that happen as adults. Just in the same way as someone can get really drunk, and that could be a really bad decision, but that's their personal and civil liberty, their right under the law. So I just think it's one of those things as well. People are going to learn. There's going to be a fast learning curve, and there's an economic incentive, a public health incentive, and many other incentives to try to have them have patrons and customers, adults, have good experiences, learn very quickly how not to have that happen. So they're not in the hospital. I'm sure the first responders don't want to deal with it. The business people don't want to deal with it. It's in no one's best interest. But there is going to be a learning curve, and that's okay. You know what? We're adults. We'll handle it. We're an awesome community. We'll pick them back up, and we'll move forward. So I just wanted to put that out there. Last, I'm also going to be going on a fact-finding trip in the beginning of November, and so as a concerned business person, I'm going to hopefully be speaking with some people in law enforcement and also the hospitals, ERs, just to kind of get a sense as to how's it going? Is it catastrophic, or is it okay, and what are some advice? If there's anything anybody else in the community at large or anybody wants me to ask them, I'm more than happy to kind of find out as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Dick Evans from Northampton. I just wanted to share something with you. I was in Boston yesterday and had the occasion to meet informally, well, in her office, with actually two of the commissioners of the Cannabis Control Commission, and I raised the question about on-site consumption. And first of all, they're using different nomenclature. They're using the term social consumption, which I can live with as well. And that's probably the term we'll see in the regulations. I also asked about the differing interpretation of the social consumption rules. That is a referendum of the voters required in order for a municipality to approve or authorize social consumption? And her response was oh no. If a community wants to do it, there's nothing stopping them. If a community is, or city council or planning board or something, is recalcitrant, and a number of voters wish to get past that recalcitrance, then they can bring the referendum to force the vote. But that's only applies if the body doesn't want to do it in the first place. And I thought I would share that with you. Great.
Thank you.
I just want to underscore what Marty said. I want to applaud this board for approaching this problem in a very sensible way, a rational way.
Good evening, members of the board. Thank you for your time. I too would like to thank you guys for having such a progressive, forward-thinking board and opening this up. I've done some extensive research at home, making calls to other states, vendors, proprietors, internet research, and if with your permission, I would like to give this to the members of the board. It's just some facts that I've compiled. I can touch a little bit on them. I'm not going to bore you too much. And then I also have some extra copies for anybody in the room that would like to have some as well. And it kind of just explains anything you need to know, what everybody used to be afraid of, all this talk. And there's real logistical numbers from Department of Highway Safety and colleges and just all across the board. So with your permission, I'd like to give this to you guys. And no need to look at it now, just on your own time.
Thank you. Excellent.
So briefly, could I get an explanation on this buffer zone? I missed the meeting that this was discussed. Could I just get a brief explanation on what you guys were talking about that?
What we've been looking at is the idea of how far of a buffer you might have around a school or a daycare or educational facility, that sort of thing. And whether it might be different for different kinds of operations or different kinds of schools or anything. We've just sort of been discussing
just
that.
the school safety, not necessarily how far a dispensary could be from another dispensary.
Well, that just came up. I mean, we've set that for tonight to talk about. I don't know that that's going to be an issue in Easthampton or not, but it's. I mean, that's another kind of buffer that many of these states and cities have.
I mean, I think you touched on it, like you said about the nail salons. Once you get a certain amount, they're no longer going to be a viable option. So you're not going to have to worry about people stepping on people's toes and being close or being too many. So, you know, to set any limit on that probably would be kind of a waste of time. Thank you for that. Moving along, from what I found out, a lot of this over consumption issue is mostly the numbers say to untested and unlicensed edibles, somebody that made them at home that does not know what they're doing. Usually a responsible adult, I know my limits. I know I can't go out and drink a whole entire bottle of scotch. I know if this thing says it has 200 milligrams, I'm not gonna go ahead and try and attack that. So a lot of the scare from that is coming from these unlicensed stuff, and this is just because usually it's prohibition or in illegal states. So the faster that we move along to these licensed things is usually the numbers are saying, in some of this info I gave you guys tonight, that the numbers are actually lower. In Colorado, they say some of the numbers of overconsumption have spiked, but that's only due to the tourism, meaning that there's way more people in there consuming product than they normally had in the years past. So moving from that, I brought with me tonight, you had mentioned it, this is a portable T-check edible testing device, and at home, without any special laboratory or anything, I can get within a 1% accuracy of the exact milligrams per dose of any carrier oil, coconut butter, anything that you could consume with edibles. So gone are those days where anybody's going to have to worry about that, because even your home chefs can instantly, within 35 seconds, tell you exactly the total amount of cannabinoids in the product. And I just wanted to bring that to you guys. You can check that out.
Can I ask a question about that? How much was that?
It was $269, and for me, that is a very, very minimal price to spend on safety, on experience, on personal happiness, just for me, myself. I'm not talking about for customers or anything like that. So, and as the future moves forward, I would assume the prices come down and the quality would go up. They also have one for smokable forms. It's a little bit more expensive, and that will tell you exactly the terpenes that are in there, pesticides, molds, THC, CBD, everything, full spectrum test within minutes, and it can app right with your phone. So,
and that one's under $1,000 as well.
It is under $1,000. I think it's around $700, and as well, I think they may have a new model out that's going to be quite a bit lower. So moving forward, we're in a day and age where some people touch on, well, we really don't know what's in there. Well, guess what? We actually know exactly what's in there, down to like the thousandth of a point. So, you know, just moving forward, I think this is gonna just create a safer society and just make it more professional, and even at the homestead, not just for something that we would like to do. In the last meeting, there's been a lot of talk about the kids and the safety. I'm not trying to retouch on this. and I can't give you an exact number, but we are going to donate anywhere from 3 to 5% of our gross earnings to the city of Easthampton to appoint some type of committee, some type of board, some type of for education for the safety of the kids, and possibly have a 1 to 2% slush like override fund just for the city, period, on oops, we really need to fix this bad part of the road, or oops. So we want to instantly come off to say we're not in it for the money, we're in it for the flavors and the love, but we want to show how concerned we are with the safety of the youth and with the safety of the town by doing something like that right off the bat. Moving along, Marty had mentioned the undo capsules that will negate any effects of THC. There's many different versions, and we will definitely be carrying them. And as we interview our customers, assure them that, you know, this is probably something you'd like to leave with just in case. And it doesn't necessarily have to be with overconsumption. It could be bad timing. I forgot, I got my son's game tonight or something, and I just had consumed something and I need to get back to earth. So it could be just a timing issue. So we're gonna have that on site, and hopefully people can use that for what they can. And that's basically it. I would like to close by just saying, somebody had mentioned tonight that this is all new and moving forward and stuff. Well, is it may be new for the city and it may be new for the state. It's not new for somebody like me. I've been doing cooking with cannabis for over a decade. I've been cultivating cannabis for over 25 years. So moving forward, not just me, I've talked to many people. Any information, any knowledge, any help that we can be around to help you guys come to a better situation, a better day, feel free to, my email's always open, my phone's open, many other people. So it is very new, it's not new to us. We're very professional and we've been doing it a long time. It's just now we can finally get licensed to do it. Doesn't necessarily mean we're coming in new, it's that, you know. That's it. Thank you for your time, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Comments, questions? All right.
What can we get
So,
done and move
yeah.
forward on this?
Well,
And we're shy a couple members of the board. I know that's a little
I know.
stringing us a little bit today.
I mean, Jessica, as far as like filling in, what kind of guidance on general things would you need, or is it better to?
It's up to you guys. I mean, I've given you all the research that I have
Right.
found, so you guys need to decide where you want to take this. We have no regs from the state to guide us.
Right.
So we're working in a vacuum. So you guys need to make decisions on what you think might be in those regs that you either are not addressed, that you want to put in something. I mean, it's really, you guys need to sort of figure out where you want to take this next.
So I'd like to continue developing it into full zoning regulations. I mean, honestly, I don't think, I think we'll get minor changes coming from the CCC. I think probably in the consumption arena, or social consumption arena, will be where we see the greatest specifications, maybe even in the home kitchens, professional kitchens. But I think doing things like setting the buffers, not putting in additional buffers between businesses, that stuff we can do. We have the definitions, we have the purpose. I think we can flesh that out. I think maybe setting, the next thing maybe to set in here where we want it. We haven't said downtown business, highway business.
Well, you did, actually. You've already
Yeah.
voted, you've already sort of taken a vote on that, so.
Oh, I see marijuana retail, but it's highlighted in yellow.
So
Downtown
where right now, I think maybe where there needs to be a discussion is, so it says number 3, applicability, independent testing laboratory, marijuana cultivator, and marijuana product manufacturer permitted by special permit, site plan approval, in the mixed-use mill industrial and industrial zoning districts. So you need to decide what the permitting structure is gonna be.
Okay.
Right.
And then the other is marijuana retailer permitted in the highway business, and there's still a
Right.
question on downtown business.
Right.
By, again, special permit or site plan approval. So if I were the board, I think you would, that's gonna be a decision no matter what the regs say.
Right.
What type of use under this category and where? And you've made some decisions on the, more of the manufacturing side will be in the mixed-use mill industrial and the industrial zoning, and retailers and highway business and maybe downtown business, but you haven't come finalize that decision yet.
Right.
And we would need to talk about permitting structure. Now, again, we don't know if the regs will say that these are gonna be required to be a special permit process or site plan approval. It didn't do that in the medical. We had
Right.
flexibility, and that was a local decision on how strong of a permitting process do you want for these different uses. So you need to, I think that's honestly where, if I were you, I would spend some time. We can deal with the performance standards later when we have the regs in hand. I mean, all of those examples that I've given you have examples of like lighting and security and noise. It's like the same stuff that we deal with under any special permit process. Now, without having the fine details from the regs about what the lighting requirements might be, or the signage requirements might be, or the security requirements might be, it's a little bit hard to fill in those holes unless there's something that's really sort of burning for you that you think needs to be put in there, and we can just bullet it and sort of deal with it when we've got, more language. But I think this is a decision that you're gonna need to make no matter what the regs say, where and what permitting
what
structure.
permit, yeah.
So that's where I think you need to focus your discussion next,
I'd
personally.
like to start with thank you. That's why you're one of the best city planners around.
One of? Come on.
I'm including,
They all
a
think
big
I'm
country.
nuts, by the way, because
All right,
we're doing this.
So, I mean, great. That I agree. That looks like something we could tackle. Special permit, I'm guessing, being the more rigorous.
Exactly, so
Right.
just to refresh, so site plan approval is for a by right use, and there's some limited review of the board to make sure that there's no major nuisance issues that are gonna happen, but essentially it's for a by right use. So you can't deny it unless they have, misfiled their application in some way, shape, or form, or there's some sticking point of negotiation that really can't get worked upon. But really, that very rarely happens, and it's for by right uses. Special permits can be denied. That's the bigger difference between the two. And they have legal notifications, abutter notifications, all of that is required in a special permit. That's not needed under site plan approval. So you can think of it as special permit as the higher rigorous review process for higher, for uses that may have more potential for nuisance. And site plan review is really for by right uses that you just want to check and make sure that there's not going to be any issues.
And some examples, some precedents. You take a restaurant in downtown business. That's a by right use, a restaurant.
Most of the retail and professional services uses in downtown are by site plan approval.
Site plan approval.
And honestly, well, that's a whole other discussion, but never mind. Yeah, I'm not going to go there.
I find this an interesting discussion.
You might want to just take one at a time and not try to deal with both. But so
Right.
to me, there's kind of a couple questions. One, is retail going to be allowed in downtown business? That's one big major question. Two, what type of permitting structure do you want under the more manufacturing type uses? And then three, what type of permitting structure do you want for the retailers? And that may change depending on zone. So you may decide that you want one thing in highway business and something else in downtown business.
Right.
So,
I tend to think personally that the testing, the cultivation, and the manufacturing is more of a site plan approval kind of a process where it's less likely to impact neighbors in the same way. It's still going to be that sort of oversight of the project and the general requirements, but it's less of a community concern, unique sort of characteristic, whereas a retailer might be something where it's more important to make sure that you're giving all the public notice, you're getting neighbors in to give feedback, that kind of thing. I do think that there's a difference in the two types of operations, but
Well, I agree with the site plan approval for the testing laboratories, the cultivators, the product manufacturers. My only hesitation there in that aspect is that I have this fear, and I hope it doesn't play out, but I admit it's my own, is that big players are going to come in, and we're going to get a Marlboro that wants to come in and buy one Ferry Street, a big spot, and just go all in with a big industrial, and which could affect traffic, it could affect a whole bunch of stuff. That for me is a concern for the industrial. Believe it or not, I actually kind of flipped that a little. I largely think site plan approval is appropriate for that, with that one fear of the big box coming
Yeah.
in and
That's a good
'cause I
point.
don't like big box. But the downtown business piece, I definitely think should be, and I tend to think recreational has less, especially if it's in a place like downtown business where we have all of our restaurants, where we have bars. It's sort of built for that. I mean, that's what it's for. I think that should be more of the site plan approval than special permit. I mean, I kind of understand, we've had people come before a special permit for salons. You know,
Right.
how much hair they throw away. We've had restaurants come in. So, I mean, we do see those if they want to do something that's abnormal from the, and we'd get those, I guess, in that case, if they sort of went out of the basic
Right.
structure, they'd still be site plan. But if they're not going out of the basic structure, I'm not sure why retail should not be site. It'd be more work for us than them.
So do you want me to give you a point of reference on how it's zoned under medical? Would that be helpful?
Sure.
Okay, so for the registered marijuana dispensary, the RMD, which is the grow side of it, the more manufacturing side, it's by site plan approval in industrial and by special permit of the planning board and mill industrial. For the dispensary portion only, the off-site medical marijuana dispensary, the OMMD, it's special permit in highway business, it's site plan approval in industrial, and it's special permit in mill industrial.
So they basically said if it's in full, if it's tucked away in a
Industrial.
industrial, that you're okay, and if not, it's gonna be
Who's
anywhere.
the we? It was you guys. I mean,
It's
it
we.
was the we.
It's
Yeah.
we.
The- Not, it wasn't somebody else.
Yeah.
It was you guys,
We,
the decision makers with city council. I
Right.
mean, this was from
So-
2014. So
So,
So that was industrial, it was site plan approval, but
yep, industrial is site plan approval. It was special permit in mill industrial, which would address Jim's concern because one ferry is owned
yeah,
mill.
no.
And then highway business
for the dispensary was special permit?
for the dispensary was special permit. Yep. And then there wasn't anything for the grow side on highway business. It was just the dispensary. So you could grow and dispense in industrial site plan approval. You could grow and dispense mill industrial with a special permit, which is how Hamden Care got
Right.
permitted. And then you could grow, you could dispense in highway business with a special permit.
Well, so it is true, I mean, we could separate out, even in the first part of paragraph 3, the testing, cultivation, and product manufacturing. It could be a different process for the mill industrial from the industrial. I mean, that addresses your concern in the hypothetical where it's one Ferry Street. It doesn't address your concern if it's another
Yeah,
building in
another-
an
yeah,
industrial
which is-
use, but
yeah.
an industrial zone.
I think I just need to swallow
But
that
it-
fear.
Yeah, but industrial use is an industrial zone, the traffic.
Right.
It's
you know,
built for that.
It's built for that, right. It's different when it's,
Let's tackle an easy one.
Very easy.
Retail's in downtown business. That part. We're not talking whether it's site plan or special permit yet. Just, is there retail in downtown business? I say yes.
I'm personally okay with that right now.
I agree.
I agree.
Yeah.
One down.
Okay.
Okay.
You can remove the highlighting question marks for downtown business.
Okay.
All right, now since we're there and we're talking about retail, and we've got highway business and downtown business now for retail. Do we have retail in the mill industrial?
No,
Mm-mm.
we didn't do that.
Why isn't,
Would you like to?
yeah, I think
When we talked about it, I mean, one of the things we talked about was that it was like removed from the downtown area.
well, aren't
Another
they?
one-
But the medical
medical's
medical is
there, right.
allowed.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about that when we discussed the zoning stuff the last time. I mean, I don't.
We already have it now.
Yeah, yeah. I personally don't have a problem with having retail in a mixed industrial.
I agree.
Oh,
Okay, so let's add.
2 down.
So retailer would be permitted in highway business, downtown business, and mill industrial.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, now let's stick to retail. We're good at that. And figure out the special permit site plan approval. Which of those for retail require a special permit and which site plan approval? I think downtown business should be site plan approval. I think that if you're gonna retail in any of the other spots, I don't know, mill industrial I'm kind of torn about, but I think that you might go special permit on. There's a thought that I'm tossing.
Jessica, remind me again what the difference is for notice to abutters on the site plan approval versus the special
There
permit?
isn't one.
There's none for site
There's
plan
no,
approval,
there's
right?
no abutter notification for site plan approval. There's no legal notification. It's just heard
An
at
application
a
would come.
public meeting of the planning board.
I mean,
Maybe if
that's
we
the
went
part
back
that
to
makes
the
me
bars.
uncomfortable.
So if a new bar wanted to move in downtown, maybe, you know, Jim's just came before us and they were expanding. Instead of doing the housing, maybe they wanted to put a bar in.
Well, let's
that
see
side.
let's see what they're doing now.
Yeah.
Let's, please hold. Restaurants and bars, not including drive-in or drive-through restaurants. Site plan approval in the downtown business.
So a bar could go in with site
Special
plan.
permit in highway business. I'm not done, sir.
I'm sorry.
Special permit in industrial and special permit in mill industrial. So the only place that a bar is allowed under site plan approval is downtown business.
I think definitely cannabis should be in the same boat. If you can put a bar in with site plan approval, you should be able to put retail cannabis.
Although I will go back to my point that I think that we've made mistakes with alcohol and we don't always want to make the same ones. I mean, that bothers me that you can put a bar in without notifying the abutters. I mean, to me, that makes me a little uncomfortable. But, I mean, that's my concern about the difference between the two is that you can wake up one day and someone has put in a bar next door or has put in a cannabis retailer and you didn't know and weren't informed. And that always makes me uncomfortable.
I respect that. I mean, that's a valid point of view.
I mean, I don't think that I think that either way, it's something that you're gonna have to fill out an application, gather your material, come here and talk to us.
Yeah.
And whether you've provided notice to abutters or not isn't onerous or that big of a difference. I mean, I think that the more people that are given notice and have an opportunity to come and either inform us about things that we don't see on a site plan application or simply voice their concerns, this seems like one of those businesses that we should provide that for, but I also think a bar does too, so that's.
Is there a problem if somebody were to come to us with a proposal and could we not say at the time, we would like this to be open to the public and get some public comment on it?
I mean, they're all
before
open to the
making a
public. It's a regular, I mean, it's a regular public hearing. It's just that there isn't advance notice, there isn't publication in the newspaper, and abutters don't get mailed a
What I'm
notice to
saying is,
come.
can we postpone it and say that what we want before making a decision is to notify the public and get their input?
I mean, I suppose we could always continue it, and, I mean, I don't know that we can make them give notice where our bylaws don't require us, but also, like, we wanna try to draft this not thinking that it's gonna be us, right? I mean,
Right.
in 10 years, it's possible that some of us may have moved on, and someone else will be here doing that, so, I mean, if that's something that we think is important, then it should be in the bylaw, but.
You know, I think your viewpoint is a good one about notification, but I think that it's a treacherous slope to have different standards for alcohol than cannabis. I think that's it's really an unfair burden to the business in that case. Just in downtown business, I think you might, holy cow, hands are going up all over. Good luck.
Should we take some public comment on this?
It's up to you, you're the chair.
I'm just gonna fill in, Jesse, I think the notice requirement under alcohol is under chapter 138, so it's a statutory requirement as opposed to a zoning requirement. I'm pretty sure that.
Oh, you are right.
Yeah, the licensing
licensing
board.
is
It's through
different.
the licensing board.
I'm sorry,
Which is-
I'm not following. Someone spell this out for me?
So the licensing board, which is the regulatory authority that gives out alcohol permits, there is public notification as part of that process. It's not part of zoning, but it's part of a different licensing board.
Just like the school buffer, which doesn't appear in our zoning regs, does
Got
through the
it.
licensing
Which
laws.
we don't have the licensing yet, but we assume that it'll likely be the same.
And we don't know if the licensing for rec will go through the licensing board or not, the local licensing board. You know,
Right.
hard telling, not knowing.
Right.
You know? So,
Or if the state will treat it like alcohol or not.
right, so do they need to get a state permit, or does there, I mean, for alcohol, you need to get a state permit and a local permit.
Right.
You need to do both, so if it's gonna be treated like alcohol,
And actually, those first hearings at the state level also have notice to abutters and stuff, I believe, so
And these are all
it's
layers
way more
on top.
complicated,
so
yeah.
maybe,
Site plan approval for downtown business.
Wait, how is that treating it like alcohol then?
Well, We don't know exactly, I admit, we're guessing, but the likelihood is that, and all we're talking about is, will these extra stopgaps put in notice to abutters? And we've got now, I think we've listed, 2, maybe 3 possible points, the state, the local, if they put it in the licensure, where they'll get notice of abutters. We're down at the bottom of the chance for notice, and to go to a special permit on the off chance that those won't include that, creating a special burden for cannabis users, it's unfair and inappropriate for downtown business.
Well, I would go the other way. I would think if they're already gonna have to do it, they've done it. It doesn't add any extra burden.
Except that they have to go through the whole special permit as opposed to the site plan because of it, when they already are going to have to do it anyway.
Yeah, why do it twice?
Or 3
I
times.
guess.
How about this? How about we do this? In the effort to expedite this conversation a little bit. So what if I put it in right now as site plan approval with a comment note about verifying a butter
Waiting for the
notifications when the regs come out?
Yeah,
And then that
that's
way
fine.
it's sort of flagged, but you both win.
Works for me.
Okay. Compromise is my middle name.
Excellent. Yes, sir. No, this is great. We're all figuring it out.
Making progress.
Making
Got things.
progress.
Maybe I missed something in a previous meeting, but I'd like to ask a question. Now, we know why you're here. We have zoning laws, and the purpose of zoning laws is to protect public health and safety and preserve the character of the community. And our zoning, or Easthampton zoning laws, govern where you can use, describes, or I should say, states how you may use property in various parts of town. That's what zoning laws are, yes, no, or maybe, as to what you can do in various parts of town. Now, you have laws already that govern retail, where you can do retail, and you have laws already that govern where you can do manufacturing. And I'm not sure, but you may have some laws governing how you do cultivation, but probably not. Now, question seems to me is, what is the hard evidence, if any, that tells us that we need more rules when the product is marijuana as opposed to widgets? I mean, we know we can regulate the sale of widgets and the manufacture of widgets. When we go to, when the product becomes marijuana, what is the evidence that demands that we have additional protections beyond those that we already have for widgets? I think that question needs to be answered, and I don't know the answer. Maybe Jessica does, but
Well, a lot of the widget making is under special permit as well in East
I'm
Hampton.
fine.
So,
fine.
I mean,
If that's the case,
Yeah.
then you don't need a marijuana law.
We're playing the same.
Well, but we've
No.
also, we've talked about some of the other differences, right? I mean, the security stuff based on the cash business and the fact that it is still a federally controlled substance. There's issues with, we're already regulating the advertising conceivably under the state law, the buffer from schools. I mean, it's sort of, it's, some of the analogies are apt, and I think that's a good way to look for those things, but then others aren't. So like I was saying about the home kitchen stuff, the cash-based part of it makes it very different from small oven or something like that. So like I think there are unique things to that, and it's the same reason why we have subcategories in our table of uses for all these things too, because there's sort of a difference between some of them, and I think there are differences here. I think that in some ways it's like alcohol, in some ways it's like cigarettes, in some ways it's just like a grocery store or a pharmacy. I think Hamden Care has raised that issue that it's more like a pharmacy at a drugstore or something, for where it's certainly medically prescribed. So I think like parts of it have different aspects. I think that for the purposes of the testing, cultivation, and manufacturing, I've talked before about how that doesn't concern me much at all. I think that the state regs will have the security measures that we need for that, and other than that, I'm assuming it's like the medical, where it looks like any other vanilla box store that you can't go in or see in or smell anything. That to me doesn't seem like it's different from any, it's probably more secure than your average widget shop. But the retail part is a little bit different, and so it's not quite like a strictly retail. For me personally, those are sort of the things that are why I think we're spending all this time trying to figure out where it fits in various aspects of the zoning law.
I would add one more component, and that's that an advanced community that sets precedent with an expert board and city planner takes the time to spell this out, so that when a prospective business person comes in, they know exactly what they can and can't do, and don't have to waste time and resources finding out because a well-put-together city has the answers.
Yeah, the lack of uncertainty, I think, is helpful. For better or worse, on things you can or can't do. It's knowing when you walk in what's allowed.
Yeah, well, we know that a lot of bylaws and ordinances that have been passed by a number of communities were really not based on any hard evidence at all, but it's basically fear. And so I would just urge you, as you consider these laws, to ask yourself, what is the hard evidence that makes this manufacturing or this retail or this cultivation more hazardous to the public health and the public safety than widget manufacturing or widget cultivation or widget retailing? And I think that's sort of the key thing. And the only real, let me just add, in my experience, the only real threat to the public safety with regard from marijuana operations is the cash issue. I think you're correct to identify that. Good to hear that the Hamden Care has a bank, and maybe they empty their cash out every night. That makes it a little less safe. And that's could possibly change, but I think addressing the cash issue is a valuable thing to do. But beyond that, I don't really see what the threats to public health and public safety are. And I hope you'll identify those specific threats to public health and public safety before you make new rules to protect them. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. What about then for the others in that retail section, we put special permit in for now and revisit it?
For the highway business,
Unless
do
you're comfortable
we
with site
add mill
plan.
industrial too?
Yep.
I'm not sure we need it for mill industrial. And my tendency would be, because mill industrial is heavily populated too, we've already got it there, would be site plan for downtown and mill industrial and special permit for the rest.
Well, we have special permit for the medical and mill industrial. If it may be worth it for consistency's sake, if nothing else, but.
And maybe you'll need to amend
There, yeah, if we change
other
it.
things too. I mean, as this discussion evolves, I'm thinking, if you feel strongly enough about the bars thing, then that could be a zone. I mean, those
Right.
are simple zoning changes, but that's part of the bigger discussion. So, there may need to be, and again, we have this idea that maybe they could be blended together, but we don't know until we
Right.
have regs. So,
Okay, so I like that proposal for now. I mean, I think the treatment is probably something that will confirm sort of what happens with regs, but I think that's true for most of these things. So I think that's some progress.
And then the homework is
What
to
I was
talk
gonna
about
say
the
is-
testing, laboratory, and cultivating for next meeting, and manufacturing.
Yeah,
sure.
I think that makes sense.
Okay, so make those changes and then I'll upload another version to the website. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else have any comments or questions before we wrap up today, realizing that this will be on the agenda again at our next meeting? Next meeting, we'll be able to?
I think so.
That'll segue into our next topic, I guess.
I think
Just
this.
wondering,
Can you come up real quick? Sorry.
I just saw a notice online today.
Identify, name and address.
Stan Diamond, Paul Street, Easthampton.
Thanks.
I just saw, talking about the big box aspect of it, that a Colorado grow facility just got permitted for a major grow facility in Palmer. So they're coming in already.
Yeah.
And I saw another one that another West Coast company just raised $10 million to open up a Massachusetts grow facility.
Yep.
So,
Something to bear in mind. Thank you.
okay.
Anybody else for tonight? All right. Thank you all very much. We will see you next time. Okay, so our final administrative item here is discussion of zoning priorities.
And if we can, because I have to be
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah,
I have to
I-
go pick up the kids somewhere.
I mean, I think we can-
So if we can either think about, so we've talked about signs, we talked about camp, I guess this had to do with the campgrounds
Right.
from the last meeting, and I was like, am I really gonna take this on as like the next thing? I am like, I'm not sure sort of what to do next, because we've got signs, campgrounds, live-work units.
Yep.
I put the permit fee schedule in here, but I think I'm gonna have Jamie work on that.
Yep.
She's, so I'm gonna have her start researching that and we'll come up with a proposal, so we don't need to worry about that. But the signs one is the one that's, everybody, we still have a meeting,
Yeah,
so if
we're
we can
still-
take it to the hallway, that'd be
you.
great.
Well
Thank
done,
you.
Jessica.
So.
The signs, yeah, we got to the hard part on the signs.
You
and
know,
then-
the signs is like half done, and it's not valid under the
Right, we need to address that.
federal law.
I agree.
You know, and so I'm actually more. If I were to prioritize, I think the board should go back to signs until we go to campgrounds. But you know, I don't know, and I haven't heard from the property owner on West Street, not a word. So you know, and I just don't, you know, how.
Well, I think the other thing is that I mean, we've done a good job with the marijuana here of keeping it on the agenda and pushing it forward every time. And I think
Right.
we're making progress as we go.
Yeah.
And I think this is gonna actually work out just how we hoped, where we're gonna have this in process when we get the state regs. We're gonna be able to look over something that's 90% done and cross-reference and get a clean thing ready.
Yep.
And I think that's gonna work out perfectly. But for something like signs, I mean, signs I think is huge. I think signs is gonna be more work even than the rest of this marijuana stuff, but
gonna be
I think we can, when we have gaps in our schedule, try to work on the sign thing and then set it aside and come back. I think we can,
So I don't think we have anything on the agenda next meeting except for marijuana.
Yep.
I'd like to propose that maybe we just refresh our brains about signs,
Yep.
like just put in the last version, then you can reread it. Like I even need a refresher and I need to go back. I just went to a workshop at PVPC last week and the whole thing was about the signs and the laws, and so I mean I can send you guys that information, I can scan it, I can put it in the Dropbox, and that's just more food for thought, but I feel like we really need to sort of.
I just went back to the case because I have been wondering how the state was gonna try to get away with the fact that they let us regulate the advertising in here.
Yeah.
And I mean, part of what it talks about is that there has to be that sort of justifiable basis for regulation on content. And so I think the logic here is a marijuana dispensary is something where there's a basis for us to be regulating this and the signage that's visible. And so it's akin to why you can regulate a directional sign or, you know, safety signs or
So
something.
it can be done with the right.
So it's,
With the
I mean,
right,
it's strict
yeah.
scrutiny, so you look at it, the other stuff is more like a rational basis, so you look at it and you're like, could any reasonable legislature have thought this was necessary? If yes, you're good. But like, but a strict scrutiny is like, you have to like demonstratively prove that this is necessary for some health and safety reason. So I think you could probably get away with regulating bar signs or something like that. So I think that may help us too when we think about it, but I think it's worth it to get. The only reason I would say not to go straight into signs is I'm not sure that this live work unit is actually a big task. Would you disagree with that?
I haven't had a chance to talk to Dave Boyle since he was here.
Okay.
So we had took it on that we would work on it together and present something to the board, so.
That's right, okay.
So let he and
that
I
can sit-
sort of work on
that
it,
off.
and I don't think it'll take a lot, but let us work on it, and then we can present something to the board.
So the choice is really then for signs or campgrounds.
Right.
I think so.
Right.
And I would like to mention that, I feel like we talked about campgrounds at some great length. We ended up pulling it out because our seasonal cottages, leading away from that because we felt we could clean up campgrounds. I felt, okay, the property owner's gonna do what the property owner did. I definitely feel like there's still an opportunity in tuning up the campgrounds for us to create a potential use for something that's beneficial to Easthampton. But my personal feeling is that while I think that has importance, that is not as important as signs. So I agree that I would like to see us
Pick
get
up signs
locked
again.
in. I know this community put a huge investment in time and effort into getting this right the first time, and it was a big slap in the face
Yeah.
to have it taken down,
Yeah.
and to just let that ride. I don't think it's the right thing.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think the only wrinkle on the campground thing is I think what we kind of discovered in the process is that right now campgrounds are more or less unregulated as long as they're nonprofits, and so it's not quite on the scale of the sign thing, but
Except, I
not
mean, I
unimportant.
think,
right. I mean, there's
if I'm remembering correctly, it's a special permit.
right.
So, I mean,
It's gonna come before us anyway.
Right.
theoretically, you're gonna be looking at traffic, you're gonna be looking at, I mean, you're not
Noise,
gonna have,
fencing, all that stuff.
you're gonna be looking at all the things that you look at for an industrial use under a special permit process that doesn't have its own performance standard. So I guess that's sort of like, you know, the sort of backup for me that makes me feel a little bit better is there is a process. I
Right.
mean, maybe it's not the best process, But at least there's a process in place where
There's
the
some
board.
oversight. It's not
There's
just
some
by writer.
oversight,
Yeah.
and you have something to back you up to allow you to ask all these questions, and you can ultimately deny it in the end.
And the only
Right.
kicker is nonprofit only, not for profit, which really,
There are ways around that.
okay.
Okay.
All right, so let's jump back into signs.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I just wanted to make
No.
sure that the direction.
I think that's good.
so I'm gonna add signs to the next agenda, and I'm, again, it's
Just
just.
a refresher to get
A
up to speed.
refresher, let's
I
just like,
recommend you put it second in the agenda. item,
Yes.
so
oh yeah,
because
totally,
We'll
Yeah.
have guests.
absolutely.
All right, anybody else? Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
Run, Jessica, run.